So, this is my presentation, Curious Archives or Books That Question You. So, a bit of an intro. So, firstly, I am Matthew Gemmell. I have a microbiology background and I am part of CGR at the University of Liverpool. So, that's the Centre for Genomic Research. And I am part of the training group at NEOF, which is the NERC Environmental Omics facility. Recently, I've become a part of the ELIXIR UK Training Club committee, hence why I'm kind of leading this meeting. And I am pretty much 100% bioinformatics trainer these days. I've been a bioinformatics trainer, not 100%, but been one since 2015. And currently I run about 10 to 15 workshops per year. Workshops being normally 1 to 2 days long, generally 2 days, with only a very few of them being 1 day long. And I have now taught over 70 workshops. So what are the contents of this presentation? So we're going to talk about formative assessment and using MCQs, and specifically talking about good practices, the benefits, and different ways to use MCQs. And this is all based on my PGCAP finding. And again, hopefully this stuff will be useful to you, but keep in mind that I primarily teach through online courses using HTML websites, and I primarily teach PhD students and above, so I'm not really doing any undergrad teaching. And so MCQ stands for multiple choice questions. So let's talk about formative assessment. So formative assessment, so this is a way to carry out continuous checks and balances during learning. And so it can allow teachers to check the learner's progress and therefore the effectiveness of their teaching practice. But primarily we're going to focus on is on the self-assessment of learners. And so it's very different to summative assessment, which is exams, essays, which is carried out after learning. So formative assessment is during learning, summative assessment is after learning. So what's the benefits to formative assessment? So it's beneficial and enjoyable for students. And all these citations are at the back of this presentation, like the full page citation or the journal citation, and the link to this is on the agenda. And so, yeah, beneficial and enjoyable for students. It helps students monitor their progress and encourage further study, and incorporates aspects of a flipped classroom, so allows for them to be self-paced. It helps decrease cognitive load, and it supports a diverse group of students in their learning. So one of the ways it helps decrease cognitive load is through variety. So formative assessment gives variety. It allows them to pause reading and start applying. So forms of formative assessment are exercises. Generally, I like to include the answers in like a chapter in the book, or with my HTML materials, I actually have the answers to the exercise in an expandable box right below each question so that they can quickly see, which again, since I'm teaching bioinformatics, it can be very useful for them to be able to see the code. And I know when I was learning, I would try out the exercise, but I might get stuck. And instead of like bothering the teacher, I would look at the like answer solution very quickly and hopefully help me get past where I'm getting stuck. And of course, there's a lot of trust that the students won't just be looking at the answers immediately, but you need to give them the answers anyway. So another way of formative assessment is verbally asking learners their progress and understanding. Easier for in-person stuff than online, because in online you're kind of asking out in the open or on a Slack, but definitely in person, I like to patrol and ask people, how are they doing? Or if they have a question, then I help them through the debugging or whatever the issue may be, and then kind of ask them how they're finding things. But the thing we're primarily going to focus on is MCQs, or multiple choice questions. So MCQs. So MCQs, I put these into my Bookdown. So I use Bookdown to make my HTML materials, and I use the R package called Web Exercises to incorporate these. Um, so that's with Bookdown. I made these presentations with Quarto slides, and so instead of using Web Exercises, which I couldn't get working, I've got these working in with the quiz extension for Quarto, and the GitHub repo, if you're interested, is parmsam/Quarto quiz. And again, these slides are available for use to like open up, and these slides will be left open on my website. That is just a GitHub website. So here's an example MCQ. So let's say we have three options. We have I'm incorrect, I'm also incorrect, and I'm correct. And this pretty much works the same way in web exercises. If you pick the incorrect one, let's check that. It says incorrect. But then what you can do is you can pick another answer, check it, and then that gives you I'm correct. So great. So let's talk a bit about MCQ design. So this is the way I like to do it. Again, do what you feel is best, but I like to give three choices per MCQ. I think primarily you'll only see four choices, but this study found that three choices is optimal. I also find it makes it easier. It's easier for the students, but also easier for you to think of three choices rather than having to think of four choices all the time. And then another one is a macro design strategy. So using interspersed answers. What does that mean? So that means using the same choices for multiple questions. So the way I like to do it is I like to have sets of three questions with the same three choices, each question having a different correct answer. So let's kind of see that in practice. So let's go. The first question here is the number of meters in a mile. Let's try this one. No, that's incorrect. So it must be this one, 1,609 meters in a mile. Go to the next question is the number of meters in a kilometer. That is 1,000. Let's check that one. That's correct. And the number of meters in a nautical mile, well, it's probably 1,609 was a normal mile, so it's most likely 1,825, which is correct. So that's kind of showing you my design strategy. And so what's the benefits of using MCQs? They're practically feasible. So if you're using Bookdown, Quarto, etc., it's not too hard to then add these in. Again, if you're using more like PDFs and stuff, then not so feasible. But if you're using these HTML-based tools, then they're really good. I find the extra time putting these in actually saves time during the workshop, because if you have just questions without this immediate feedback, you tend to get a lot of questions like, was I correct in this answer? Was this answer correct, etc. Whereas if they're getting that instant feedback from the MCQ, then you get a lot less questions. It's intuitive for learners, so I always include a bit of a demonstration how to use this stuff, but then learners tend to know how to use this kind of stuff pretty intuitively. It's clicking a button on a website. Again, I've kind of mentioned you're getting that instant feedback, knowing if you've got something right or wrong instantly. Reattempting questions is allowed and is beneficial to learning. So that's the thing. It kind of gets past the barrier. It's like, oh, if they're not quite sure, they can pick what they think is the best answer. If that's wrong, they can then kind of pick their second best, and then hopefully they don't need a third attempt. And it helps guide learners in their learning progress. So how do you use these MCQs? So there's 3 points I like to use them for. It's to reinforce definitions in theory. So especially with when you're teaching like intro to R and intro to Python, there's a lot of definitions that are very useful to know, like what's a list in Python, what's a list in R, tuples, vectors, etc. These kind of terms can be hard to learn initially, but very important for when you're trying to get help online to use the correct terms. I like to use them to recap questions at the end of sections, which promotes recall. So instead of having bullet points at the end of a section, which kind of recaps things, which is still good, I instead have like these bullet points in the forms of MCQs. So then they're actually actively participating with these recall questions. And then for bioinformatics specifically, and probably any computational analysis, I like to use it for when they're interrogating output, because that's a vital skill to learn in data science. So let's look at recap questions. So let's go through some recap questions of what I've talked about. So what is an MCQ? Well, that's a multiple choice question. Yep. When is formative assessment carried out? That's during learning. Correct. And what do recap MCQs promote? And that is recall. Correct. So that's kind of an example of recap MCQs, but what about interrogating output? So these are MCQs that help guide interpretation, so students know what to look at, and MCQs inform them if they're looking in the wrong or the right direction. And so we're going to look at some alpha diversity box plots This is from 16S bacterial community analysis. It's kind of a measure of diversity, and alpha means that each value is calculated for each sample. So let's look at these box plots. So we got two box plots here. We have sites, so different sites, 10, 11, 12, and then numbers, and then aquarium. Multiple samples per site, which is why we're able to get these box plots of these two alpha diversity values, which is Shannon and Simpson. The higher the value, the higher the diversity. The lower the value, the lower the diversity. So which site has the lowest diversity? So if we look at all of them, there's one that's pretty obvious, which is the aquarium. So let's check that. Correct. So yeah, aquarium does have the lowest diversity. So which site of the options provided, so i.e. aquarium, site 2 and site 10, has the highest diversity? So let's look at site 2. Site 2 is quite low, aquarium's lower, and then site 10 is actually the highest. At least that's what I think. So let's check that. Yes, that's correct. Which site has the greatest range of Shannon values? So again, that pretty much which one has like the biggest range in the box plot. Site 2 definitely looks like it has the biggest range. So let's click on that one. And yes, we are correct in that interpretation. And then we have some further questions. So how many sites have a median Shannon value greater than 2.0? So let's look at Shannon. The median value is the line in the box plot. 2.0 is here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's check that. That's correct. And then how many sites have a median Simpson value less than 0.6? Simpson's over here. 0.6 is here. So 1, 2. And let's check that. And that is correct. So in that case, we only had a set of two, but that's fine. We don't need to follow the set of three all the time. So outro, so that was formative assessment and MCQs. So my design practice, I like to normally have 3 questions with the 3 same choices, and normally they each have a different answer, but of course you can switch things up. MCQ uses, I like to use them for definitions in theory, to recap questions, and for interrogating output. So thanks for listening, and are there any questions anyone would like to ask?